Welcome everyone. This is the editorial page of Indian Express. Today is 29th September 2022 and I will explain this editorial in 3 steps. First is why is this editorial written? Second is what the writer of editorial wants to convey to the readers. And third is what can we expect in the future about the topic that is given in the editorial. So we will start with the first editorial, which is Rediscovery of the South. Now why is this editorial written? Because India is going to take its presidency of G20. When? This year in November. After the November ends, which means from starting of December, from 1st December 2022 to November 30, 2023, India will be a president of G20. Now what exactly is the writer wants to convey? So India's G20 presidency can be a success or a non-success. There can be no other options, there are only two options. What can make India's G20 presidency a success and what if this G20 is not a successful? So you see, we'll read the editorial. Caught between an existential East-West conflict of major power. What is he talking about? He is talking about Russia and Ukraine war and also a Cold War that is going on between Russia and US. So West means West powers, US plus Europe, and East is Russia and China. And dealing with crisis of multilateralism plus slowing down of major economies. As you know, global economy is in a recession. It is slowing down. Only India is the country that is shining in this gloomy light. It is growing at a rate of 7%, 6 to 7%. Other countries are going into recession. For example, UK, Bank of England has clearly stated that UK is facing recession. And a global impasse on the eve of taking charge of the presidency of Group of 20. India has widely rediscovered the South, which means after all of these crises, all of this East-West conflict, major economic recession, India has taken presidency and has rediscovered the South. India is perceived as a voice of global South. This was declared by External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar after a hectic week at the UN. So he was asked, S. Jaishankar was asked, if India was taking the dust off an earlier foreign policy template of South-South cooperation. And why he is saying that earlier foreign policy? Because India has somewhat deviated from this South-South cooperation. It extended its cooperation more with the world powers, for example G7. So will it again start its template of South-South cooperation? What did the minister reply? He replied that global South solidarity has always been with us. It's a part of our DNA, which means he wants to say that we will not restart, it's already going on. Interestingly, still fighting shy of admitting to our lower middle income developing country status. So we feel somewhat shy after all the efforts. We feel shy to say that we are low middle income developing country. So what India has done, it has adopted a new fashionable term of the aspirational third world. And what is that term? It is global South, which means we aspire to become a developed country, and India too has taken oath to become a developed country till 2047. This was taken by Prime Minister Modi and all the citizens of our country in the Red Fort this Independence Day. Now India has hosted a G77 meeting in the New Delhi in the 1980s. So what is G7? G7 is a 134 member group, and this group consists of these 134 developing economies. So you see, India has hosted in the 1980s, long time. So what is now the status of this G77? Pakistan has been more active within this group, and it currently chairs it. What was India doing, and what is India doing currently? India, on the other hand, was busy hobnobbing with the big guys, which means big economies, in forums like G7 plus, also BRICS, SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which happened in the last 15 days, trilaterals, quadrilaterals like Quad, trilaterals such as JAI, Japan, America, India, RIC, Russia, India, China. It was less participative in G77. Now, why exactly India has not participated more, has not been more active in this member group of G77? So, writer has written down several factors that have contributed to a change in Indian official outlook. Why it wanted to be with big guys, why it wanted to be with big economies. So first is the persistent unwillingness of the big five, that is US, Russia, China, France and UK, to reform UN governance. You know, these are the P5, permanent five of UNSC. So India wanted UN governance reform, and it wanted India into UN Security Council. It wanted to be a permanent member. That is why it was more coordinating with these big economies. Second, he say that Western deglobalization and disinterest. And why it is calling Western deglobalization? We have examples with us. West has stopped exporting semiconductor parts, or you can call chip making parts, to the China. It is not exporting those components of chip that China requires to make a chip. So what does that mean? It wants to be a self-reliant country, US, and China too. India too wants to become a manufacturing hub. So Western deglobalization and disinterest in the reform of multilateral financial and trade organizations. It does not want the reform of these organizations such as IMF, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, World Trade Organization. So that is why India wanted reform of these organizations. That is why it was more coordinating, in order to make up the mind of Western countries, in order to make their mind to reform these institutions. Third is failure on the part of US, European Union, China and Japan. And how does these countries fail? These countries fail to address the problem of mounting external debt burden of developing countries. So they failed to mount this external debt burden. Fourth is the impasse on climate change. You know, a lot of conflict occur in climate change. Developing countries want monetary assistance from developed countries, and developed countries do not want to pay them. Why developing countries want this monetary benefit? They want because they say that you were the one who were industrializing your factories, who were running these fossil fuels based factories that have polluted the world. And what impact do we feel? It means that it is the developing countries that feel the impact. So you have to pay for the historical mistakes. Finally, fifth, you say the unleashing of East-West power struggle brought to a head by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, imposing huge cost on developing economies. So it is the developing economies that are facing costs, as EU and UK is also facing, but not that much as developing economies. So this is the option. These are the reasons that why India participated with these big economies. Now we would know within the next month where G20 is headed, which means a G20 will be success or failure, we will know by the next one. And how exactly? Because host country Indonesia has tried to bring all sides together. So currently the host country Indonesia wants to bring all sides together, which means wants to bring Russia and US, West and East together. But given the state of Ukraine war, it is unlikely that Putin and Biden will find themselves face to face in Jakarta, Indonesia. It is located in Indonesia. So it means that it is not likely that these two leaders will come face to face. So this can decide the future of India's G20 presidency. If the Indonesia summit fails, then G20 itself might enter a non-functional phase, which means whatever India does, it will enter a non-functional phase. And you know exactly why. Because India was considered a mediator between West and Russia. It was considered that India has good relationship with the US and Russia, but what India did? No one listened. The India's statement, diplomacy and talks and peace, war is still going on. So if Indonesia summit fails, G20 might be a non-functional summit. So what can India do now? So if G20 is going to stymie by East-West conflict, why not try to breathe life into it as a platform for North-South dialogue? So India will just change its path. It will use this G20 platform for North-South dialogue. 3 countries of the South, Indonesia, India, Brazil, are taking charge of G20 in 2022 to 2024. So this period offers an opportunity for North-South issues to be flagged. So India will use this platform as a North-South dialogue. If it fails in its own aim, so as a low middle income country, this is about India, which is seeking a rapid economic development. So India wants to become a developed country, and also in terms of economy too. So this India remains well placed to be the voice of the global South. So it will remain a voice of global South. And how exactly? If it regains the trust of other developing countries, especially Africa and Southeast Asia, if it gives them trust that this India will espouse their interest, it will talk of their benefit, then it can play this role effectively. It can play the voice of global South effectively if it regains the trust of developing countries. So we see G20 is going to be in December this to November next year. What India wants to do more? It wants to take this G20 as an opportunity to promote trade, to promote tourism, to promote culture. So given the impasse in G20, India may have well decided to make the most of the run up to the summit, using this period, which is November 2022 to December 2022 to November 2023, to host several conferences and events showcasing India as a tourist destination. Union Minister of Tourism and Culture had already said that this is good opportunity for India to promote tourism. So it will organize events and conferences in different parts of the world. So in order to diversify these events, and then what will occur? It will promote India's tourist. So this was the editorial. Now what can we expect in the future about this topic? You see, India's future will depend on Indonesia summit. West and East are not willing to come in face to face. But there is an option too. If this fails, India can promote Global South. And what India must do, it will first look at its own condition, own status. It is a developing country, so it has to work hard in order to become a developed country and then participate in those regional and bilateral groupings. So most effort will be, in fact it must be, to make India a developed country. Now this writer was a policy analyst, and I think the editorial was nice, very good in fact. Eye of the state. Draft Telecom Bill proposes expansion of legal surveillance with no safeguard. Why this editorial is written? Because a new bill is going to replace an old act. What is this new bill? Draft Telecommunication Bill 2022. And what is that old act? Telegraph Act. And how old? 1885. So this editorial is about what exactly do this telecommunication bill want to replace, and what are the more restrictions that will be put on the users. So first it starts with a story. So over 2 decades ago, allegations of surveillance against politicians led to a CBI inquiry and report against VP Singh government. So there was allegations against politicians, and then a CBI inquiry started. Allegations revealed what? It revealed that imaginary reasons were given for ordering phone tapping without authorization. So there were phone tapping of these politicians without their authorization, without their consent. This led to Supreme Court issuing the last substantive legal reform on surveillance laws in India. Now, SC's direction are likely to remain the last reforms. Why? Because Union government has published the draft Telecommunication Bill 2022 to replace the Telegraph Act 1885. So what does this draft bill convey? What does it mean for the users like you and us? The surveillance power is principally contained under section 5(2). So this Telegraph Act is talking about Telegraph Act. Telegraph Act has a surveillance power under section 5(2), and this power has resulted in unaccountable, opaque, also unconstitutional exercise of surveillance that has led to accusations across political spectrum. So these surveillance, these observations were unconstitutional. That is why politicians are complaining about it, that their phones were taped and all that. Same provision has been replicated today, almost word to word. In what? In clause 24(2) of the Telecommunications Bill. The worst part is that previously that application of power was only for the calling, SIM to SIM calling. But now these powers have extended to telecommunication services that defined to include OTT communication services, which means over the top communication services. Not only calls will be recorded, but internet based text, audio visual transmissions that we do with Signal app, Telegram app, WhatsApp app, or Zoom app, the Signal app, all these apps, not acts, will be surveillanced, which means a keen eye will be placed on the user's privacy. These apps work on end-to-end encryption, and that will be sought to be broken. Now, what does this mean for the customers? Clause 24(2) will lead to greater surveillance by making even personal conversations over OTT communication services available to law enforcement agencies, which mean texts, video plus images, whatever the users send to each other will be available to law enforcement agencies. For example, the call recording was available previously in the Telegraph Act, but now all this will be available. So what the writer wants to say? He said that with each subsequent provision, the bill become worse. For example, for instance, clause 34 imposes a positive duty on users not to provide false particulars. So for example, if you enter your date of birth false, then it may even lead to legal prosecution. So it is a positive duty on users not to provide false particulars, which means you cannot write your name, your date of birth, your address wrong. It can lead to legal prosecution. See, that is why they are criticizing, these writers are criticizing this clause and this bill. Clause 51 requires service providers to supply user information to authorized officers not only for pending but also for apprehending civil or criminal proceedings, which means they have to send the information not only to pending cases but also to the starting cases, starting civil or criminal proceedings. This massive expansion in legally sanctioned surveillance of millions of Indians is being proposed at a time when access to mobile internet has increased. So this bill, this surveillance of millions of users, Indian users, is proposed at a time when mobile internet usage access have increased. People are using more mobiles, more internets, more internet connection is reaching to the Indian citizens. When there exist unprecedented methods of data collection, a lot of data is already collected. Facebook, WhatsApp, all of these collect your data. And now more data will be collected. You see, personal communications will be collected. This is being done without a data protection law. We do not have a robust data protection law, and also there is little transparency. So writer has written these. Now the next editorial is about politics, Indira's failures and utter success. So this is not that important. You can read these both editorials by yourself as well.